The mountain seemed to hate them from the very first minute. First, it greeted them with a furious sun that scorched away their sweat and strength, then with treacherous scree that slid out from under their feet as if unwilling to hold them. And then, when they reached the old abandoned serpentine road, the sky, which had been piercingly blue moments ago, turned black in a matter of seconds. A cold wind smelling of ozone and wet stone rushed down from the pass, and the downpour began. It wasn't rain, but a solid wall of water crashing down on them with such force it stole their breath. Sam and Dean, brothers bound not only by blood, but by a passion for extreme hiking, were soaked through in an instant. "To hell with everything," Dean shouted, barely audible over the roar of the rain. "We need shelter." There was nowhere to run. Rocks, a few rare wind-twisted pines, and nothing more. They were already preparing to press their backs against the cold stone and wait out this madness when Sam, wiping his water-blurred eyes, pointed ahead. "Look!" In a break in the grey curtain of rain off to the side of the path stood a cottage. Tiny, built from dark, almost black timber, it seemed to have grown into the mountainside. It was so inconspicuous it could have been mistaken for a pile of stones, if not for the square of its single window, dark and sightless. They ran towards it, stumbling over wet roots. Above the low door hung a wooden sign, half eroded by time and weather. The letters, once burned into the wood, were hard to read. "Keeper. Do not enter. Hospitable." Dean snorted, already grabbing the iron bracket that served as a handle. "Wait." Sam put a hand on his shoulder. "It says do not enter." "Out there," Dean retorted. "It says drown or freeze." He shoved the door hard. It gave way with a creak, opening into darkness and cold. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust, dry rot, and something else. A faint but persistent scent of old leather and bygone years. The rain outside immediately became muffled, as if someone had turned down the volume. They found themselves in a single room. No furniture, no hearth. Bare walls roughly cobbled together from the same dark logs. In one corner lay a pile of debris that might once have been a bed. In the opposite corner, Sam noticed an object that stood out against the absolute desolation. It was a book, thick, in a worn leather binding, without any identifying marks. It lay neatly, as if placed there only yesterday. "The logbook," Sam uttered, picking it up. The leather cover felt cold and rough to the touch. "The keeper's." Dean, meanwhile, approached the single window. The glass was murky, covered on the inside with a layer of age-old grime. "Strange," he muttered. "The rain seems to have stopped." Sam looked up from the book. "It can't be. We were being washed away 5 minutes ago." "See for yourself." Sam joined his brother. Outside the window there wasn't a drop of rain. Only a thick, milky white, utterly motionless fog. It lay like a dense blanket, obscuring everything more than a couple of meters from the wall. No rocks or trees were visible. It seemed the cottage was floating alone in airless space, cut off from the entire world. That was fast, Sam said uncertainly. A feeling of mild anxiety, previously muted by the relief of escape from the downpour, began to stir in his chest. Mountain whims. Dean brushed it off, but the former confidence was gone from his voice too. "What's in the book?" Sam returned to the center of the room, crouched down and opened the heavy cover. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the handwriting in most entries was firm and neat. It was a dry report on the weather, wildlife spotted, the condition of some trail. Sam leafed through until he reached the final pages. Here the handwriting began to change. First it became uneven, then hurried. And the last entry, the one that took up a whole page, was written in a trembling, broken hand. The letters jumped, the ink blots resembling tear stains or splashes of something else. "They are not on the trail," Sam read aloud. and his voice sounded deafeningly loud in the tomb-like silence. They were never on the trail. "They are inside." They seep through the cracks. They are in the very air. They know my scent. They feel my breath. They whisper outside the walls, but the walls are them. I am no longer the keeper. I am prey, in a cage. I must go out. I must go out now before... The entry broke off mid-sentence. No signature, no date, only a yawning emptiness below, filled with the pen's trembling flourishes that never formed into letters. Sam raised his eyes to Dean. He stood in the middle of the room, pale, listening to the silence. The silence outside was now absolute. No wind, no sound of water, nothing. Ravings of a mad hermit. Dean tried to break the tension with a joke, but his smile was crooked and unnatural, just a lunatic's notes. At that moment they heard the sound. It was quiet but distinct, seeming to come from the very walls. Not a creak or a rustle. It was a scraping, the sound made when something sharp and heavy, perhaps a piece of iron or a sharpened stone, is dragged across rough, unplaned wood. Scree! They froze, holding their breath. The sound repeated. Scree! Slow, measured, intentional, and then they realized the most terrible thing. It didn't come from one point. One scraping came from the wall with the door. A second, almost in sync with it, came from the wall with the window. From two opposite sides simultaneously. Someone or something was outside, and it wasn't alone. Dean lunged for the door, grabbed the iron bracket. It wouldn't budge, as if jammed. He threw his whole weight against it, but the door, which had opened so easily from the outside, was now immovable as rock. Damn it, he cursed, jumping back. The scraping continued. Scree, scree, it grew slightly louder. Now within it, one could discern not just friction, but what seemed like an attempt to bite into the wood, to tear off its top layer. The window, Sam shouted. They ran to the murky glass, trying to see something in the impenetrable fog. There was nothing there, only a white, lifeless shroud. But the sound of scraping was coming directly from behind the thin barrier of logs and glass. Sam pressed his palm against the wall. The wood was cold as ice, and he fancied he felt a slight, barely perceptible vibration in it. Suddenly, the scraping stopped. A silence fell, more ominous than the sound itself. Dean and Sam looked at each other, holding their breath. Maybe they'd left. And then a new sound made them flinch and recoil towards the center of the room. A dull, wet thud, as if something large and soft had hit the wall from outside. Then another, and another. This wasn't scraping. It was like someone leaning against the wall, embracing it, pressing against it with their full mass. Simultaneously from two sides. The walls seemed to shudder for a moment. Dust danced in the beam of light Sam directed at the ceiling. Are they trying to get in? Dean whispered, his voice filled with nothing but pure terror. No, Sam forced out, looking again at the page of the logbook. He wrote, they are inside. They aren't trying to get in. They're checking the cage, sensing us. The idea was so monstrous the mind refused to accept it. But there was no alternative. This cottage wasn't a shelter. It was a trap, and they had locked themselves in it voluntarily. The scraping started again, but now it was different, more insistent, furious. It behaved not like a creature trying to get inside, but like a predator, sharpening its claws on the bars of a cage with prey inside. The sound moved in a circle, shifting from one wall to another, encircling them. Sometimes it faded, sometimes it intensified, but it didn't stop for a second. An hour passed. 2. Time lost all meaning. The fog outside the window didn't dissipate. They sat on the cold floor, back to back, unable to utter a word. The constant monotonous scraping crept into their brains, eating away at their consciousness. It was omnipresent. It was an obsession. It was the only sound in this inside-out world. I can't take this, Dean hissed through his teeth, clamping his hands over his ears. They either have to come in or leave. "They can't come in," Sam replied monotonously, staring into the void. "And they can't leave. They are part of this place, as we soon will be." He looked at the logbook lying nearby, the trembling entry, the death plea. Perhaps the last keeper had also first sought shelter here, and then realized he had become part of the exhibition of this cursed place. His job was no longer to watch over the trail. It was to be locked in this box while something outside scraped at the walls, knowing his scent. Suddenly, Dean jumped up. "No," he shouted, addressing not his brother but the walls. "Do you hear me? Get away!" He punched a log. In response, the scraping only intensified, becoming piercing, almost triumphant. Their despair seemed to be exactly what these unseen entities were waiting for. Sam closed his eyes. He no longer heard the scraping. He heard only the whisper, the one the keeper had written about. It wasn't in his ears, but right in his head, born from the very rhythm of those terrible sounds. It consisted not of words, only of sensations, cold curiosity, ancient hunger, and infinite, all-consuming loneliness. He understood that going out, as the keeper had written, didn't mean simply opening the door and stepping into the fog. It meant ceasing to be oneself. It meant becoming the one who scrapes outside, or becoming the one who sits inside until his mind slowly turns to dust. The scraping filled everything. It was in the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It was in their bones. Dean was throwing himself against the door in hysterics, his screams drowned out by the monotonous, relentless scree. Sam sat motionless on the floor, looking at his trembling hand. He no longer felt fear, only a strange, chilling resignation. He was the new keeper, and his watch was just beginning, and the sound outside the walls was now the only thing confirming his existence. He knew their scent, and they knew his, and so it would continue, until the next traveler seeking shelter from a mountain downpour knocked from the outside. Time became tangled, turning into a monotonous torture of scraping. Dean, exhausted, slid down the wall by the door and sat, hugging his head, silently rocking back and forth. His thrashing, his screams had dried up, leaving behind only an empty shell in which that brain-piercing sound echoed. Sam felt something different. Panic slowly receded, giving way to a chilling, almost inhuman understanding. He looked at his brother and saw not an ally, but a dying ember. An ember that would soon go out, leaving behind just another source of scent for them, outside the wall. Dean. His voice was hoarse but calm. The scraping ceased for a moment, as if listening. "Dean, listen to me." He didn't answer, just pressed his head harder into his knees. "It's not trying to break down the door," Sam continued, looking at the ceiling, at that point where the shadows converged. "It's not trying to break down the walls. It's cleaning them. Like you clean the cage of a chicken you're preparing for dinner. It's sharpening its tools. It's preparing the space." "Shut up," Dean whispered. He wrote, "I must go out before." Sam slowly rose to his feet. His body ached, but his mind was clear and cold as a blade. "Before I become part of this, part of them, or before I go mad and open the door myself. That's the choice, Dean, to become the one who scrapes, or the one who sits inside until he dies." The scraping resumed, but now there was a hint of approval in it. It became more rhythmic, like the beat of a funeral march. "We have another choice." Sam approached his brother and crouched before him. A strange, detached determination burned in his eyes. "We can choose how this ends. We can deny them the enjoyment." Dean slowly looked up at him. There was terror in his eyes, but somewhere deep down, a faint glimmer of hope. "What are you suggesting?" His voice was a soundless whisper. "We go out," Sam said quietly, "but not the way they want. Not as panicked victims running. We go out on our own terms. One of us opens the door. The other gives us a chance." He pulled a folding knife from his pocket, small but with a razor-sharp blade. Their last shared purchase before the hike. Understanding, slow and horrifying, dawned on Dean's face. No, Sam, no. It's the only way to break the circle. Sam's voice broke for the first time, the pain he'd been suppressing so hard finally bursting through. One goes out to distract them, to give the other a chance to run. The fog, it can't last forever. There must be a boundary. You're insane. There's nothing out there, only them. And what is there in here? Sam spread his arms wide, pointing at the walls from which the very darkness seemed to seep. There's slow death in here. There's madness in here. I prefer the quick kind, and I prefer to choose it myself. He held the knife out to his brother, handle first. Take it. No. Dean scrambled back, hitting the wall. I won't. Then I'll go out unarmed. Sam placed the knife on the floor between them. And you'll stay here alone, with this. He nodded towards the wall from which the scraping came. Forever. You'll become the new keeper. You'll keep your logbook until the ink runs out, and then you'll start scratching entries on the walls with your own nails. He saw his words sink into his brother, saw him mentally painting that picture, and the horror of it outweighed the horror of a quick death outside. The scraping suddenly became furious, impatient. The creatures outside the wall seemed to sense the prey preparing an unexpected move. A dull blow sounded, so strong that dust rained from the ceiling. The wall shuddered. Dean squeezed his eyes shut. Tears streamed down his dirty cheeks. He reached out a trembling hand and took the knife. The blade glinted in the semi-darkness. I'll open the door, he whispered, and go out first. Run, Sam. Run, don't look back. If there's even the slightest chance. Sam nodded, a spasm tightening his throat. It was the worst, most despicable plan in the world. But it was their plan, their final act of free will in this cursed place. They stood up, Dean by the door, gripping the knife handle in his sweaty palm. Sam, a few steps behind, ready to sprint. On 3, Dean said, and his voice suddenly became firm. It held the resolve of the doomed. 1, the scraping stopped. An ominous, oppressive silence fell, full of expectation. 2, Sam saw his brother's back tense. He himself was ready to bolt. 3, Dean roared as he yanked the iron bracket towards himself. The door swung open with a deafening screech, revealing a wall of milky white, motionless fog, and immediately, from the fog, from both sides, shadows darted. They had no form, just clots of moving darkness from which emanated that same smell of old leather, damp earth, and madness. They rushed at Dean. Run, Sam, he shouted, slashing the knife in front of him. Sam lunged forward, jumping out of the cottage. The cold of the fog burned his skin. He ran, seeing nothing ahead, hearing nothing but his own heart and the horrifying, wet sounds coming from behind, not screams, but squelching, tearing sounds, interspersed with the fierce, hopeless scraping of steel against something hard. He ran, stumbling over invisible stones, choking on the thick, dead air. He ran, expecting at any moment for the same shadows to reach out from the fog and drag him away. But they weren't there. They were busy. Dean had done his job. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the fog's moisture. He had betrayed his brother. He had used him as bait, as a bargaining chip for his dubious salvation. The tragedy wasn't just in Dean's death, but in the fact that Sam now had to live with that knowledge. With the fact that his freedom had been bought at such a price. Suddenly he saw an outline ahead, dark, blurred. Another tree, a rock. He ran towards it, hoping it was the boundary, the end of this nightmare, but as he approached, his heart sank. It wasn't a rock or a tree, it was the cottage, the very same keeper's cottage. He had run in a circle. He had run away from it only to return to it from the other side. He stopped, panting before the open door. Inside was darkness. Outside, on the threshold, lay the bloody, forgotten folding knife. There was no trace left of Dean. The silence was absolute again. No scraping, no rustling, and then Sam understood the most terrible truth. Escape was impossible, not because the fog was endless, but because the cottage was the nucleus of this place. Its gravity wasn't physical but metaphysical. It attracted victims, and it never let them go. He slowly, like an automaton, walked inside. The door quietly clicked shut behind his back, with a soft yet final click. He was home. He walked over to the spot where he had found the logbook. The book lay in the same place. Next to it now lay the bloody knife. Sam sank to his knees. He was the new keeper. His watch was beginning. He took the book, opened it to the last page. With a trembling hand, no longer from fear but from a strange, cold acceptance, he wrote on the blank sheet. Dean tried to go out. They knew, they always know. I remain, I must remain. He didn't finish the phrase. He set the book aside and approached the wall. He ran his fingers over the rough wood. It was cold and lifeless, and then he heard it. At first quiet, barely perceptible. Cree. He squeezed his eyes shut. It wasn't an external sound. It came from within his own mind, from within his soul. Scree. He opened his eyes and looked at his hands. He imagined how one day, perhaps very soon, he himself would rise and begin scraping from the inside against the walls of his eternal prison. Or maybe he was already doing it. Maybe he had always been doing it. Scree. The sound grew louder, more insistent. Sam slowly turned to the wall and, raising his hand, dragged his nails across the wood. Scree. The answering whisper from outside the walls was full of satisfaction. The circle was closed. The tragedy had found its completion and its new beginning.